All right, so you guys wanted to take a deep dive into this Central Park jogger case.
And let me tell you, this one, it's a doozy.
It really is.
This case is one of those that it just has everything.
Yeah.
You've got your brutal attack, you've got a media frenzy,
Oh, yeah.
you've got twists and turns you wouldn't believe.
It's a wild one.
It is a wild one, and we've got all the stuff for this one.
Yeah.
We've got court documents, we've got news articles, we've even got statements from some of the people that were actually involved in this.
So this is going to be a long one, so buckle up.
What's so interesting to me about this case is how much it really captures kind of like the anxieties of New York City in the late 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. You've got, crime rates are soaring, the crack epidemic is exploding,
Right.
and there's this real fear of, what they called back then, wilding youth.
Yeah, like packs of kids just kind of roaming around.
Right, and I think the Central Park jogger case just becomes this real focal point for all those fears, and the impacts of it are still felt today.
We're talking about a time where people were, I think, legitimately terrified to walk through Central Park after dark.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't just like one isolated incident, right?
Yeah.
Like, this was a crazy night.
The night of April 19th, 1989, it was chaos in Central Park.
Wow.
Multiple attacks all across the park created this real sense of lawlessness and terror.
Yeah.
You had cyclists that were assaulted, people were robbed.
Oh, wow.
It was a real-life horror movie.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Wow.
Right.
And then kind of in the midst of all this chaos,
Right.
you have the attack on Trisha Miley,
Right.
who becomes known as the Central Park Jogger. And, her injuries were so severe.
Oh, my God.
She was in a coma for 12 days.
Horrible.
Doctors weren't even sure she would survive.
It's, the brutality of this attack, the fact that they didn't know who did it,
Right.
just added to all this fear that was gripping the city.
Uh-huh.
Everyone wanted answers. They wanted someone to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
And that's where things get really interesting because the police,
Yeah.
they quickly apprehend 6 teenagers,
Okay.
5 of whom become known as the Central Park 5.
Right.
But here's the thing. None of their DNA matched the crime scene evidence.
That's crazy.
That's the big issue here.
Yeah.
Despite the lack of physical evidence, these teenagers, all of whom were minors,
Right.
gave videotaped confessions.
Okay.
Confessions they later recanted, saying that they were coerced by the police.
So how did these confessions even come about?
Right.
And why were they so readily accepted when the science didn't add up?
Right. That's the big question.
I have to imagine that the media frenzy surrounding this case played a role.
Oh, absolutely.
It was all over the news back then.
It was a full-blown media circus.
Yeah.
You have this young, white, professional woman who's brutally attacked in, supposedly this safe haven,
Right.
Central Park.
Uh-huh.
And then you've got this group of young Black and Latino men that are, sort of painted as these perpetrators.
Right.
And this narrative is amplified by the media, fueling public fear and outrage. And then, of course, you've got Donald Trump,
Oh,
who
yeah.
took out those infamous full-page ads calling for the death penalty.
He did.
He did.
Those were crazy.
Those ads ran in all the major newspapers.
Wow.
And he used some very inflammatory language,
Yeah.
calling the suspects animals, demanding that they suffer.
Yeah.
It was really a blatant attempt to influence public opinion before the case even went to trial.
Wow. Talk about a trial by media.
I know, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And, it's also really interesting how those teenagers were publicly named,
Yeah.
even though they were minors.
That's not standard procedure, is it?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And it really had some serious consequences.
Yeah.
These boys and their families, they were subjected to intense scrutiny. They got threats. And it's also worth noting that there was a similar attack on a Black woman in Brooklyn around the same time
Okay.
that got far less attention.
That's interesting.
So it really makes you think, what made the Central Park jogger case so different in the eyes of the media and the public?
It's hard not to see the racial dynamics at play here.
Yeah.
This young white woman attacked in Central Park, that grabs headlines.
Right.
A similar attack on a Black woman, it's practically ignored.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
And it raises some really important questions about whose stories get told,
Yeah.
whose lives are valued, and how race and media narratives really intersect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, here we have coerced confessions, a media frenzy,
Yeah.
an outraged public is demanding justice.
Right.
So what happens when these cases actually go to trial?
Well, I know there were two separate trials, right?
Yes, there were.
Okay.
And both of them heavily relied on those controversial confessions.
Yeah.
The defense, of course, argued that they were coerced,
Right.
and they pointed to the inconsistencies and, of course, the lack of physical evidence.
But the jury convicted them anyway.
They did.
Oh, wow.
All 5 were convicted on various charges.
Wow.
And it's actually pretty crazy because some of the jurors later admitted that they were swayed by evidence that turned out to be inconclusive,
Like what?
like hairs that didn't even match.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's really a chilling example of how easily we can be misled by what seems like conclusive evidence.
So you have these 5 young men that end up serving years in prison based
Yeah.
on these flawed confessions and these misinterpretations of evidence. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So how did the truth finally come to light?
Well, the answer shockingly came from the real perpetrator of the crime.
Wait, what? They found the actual attacker?
They did.
Oh, wow. This
Yeah.
is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
His name is Matias Reyes, and his story is one you won't believe.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Central Park Jogger case. You know, when we left off, we had this bombshell.
Yeah.
Matias Reyes, who was a convicted serial rapist, had confessed to the attack on Tricia Miley,
Right.
and his DNA was a match.
It's almost too much to comprehend, you know?
Right.
Yeah. These 5 teenagers convicted and imprisoned based on coerced confessions,
Right.
0 physical evidence, and the whole time the actual perpetrator is already behind bars.
Yeah, it really makes you question the whole system.
It does.
And sadly, it's not as uncommon as you'd think, you know.
Really?
False confessions, especially from young people who are they're much more susceptible to pressure. It's a real problem in our justice system.
So you've got this confession from Reyes. The DA's office confirms there's no evidence against the Central Park 5.
Right.
Were they released immediately?
You would think, right.
Yeah.
But overturning a conviction, it's not that easy. The DA, she still had her work cut out for her to really present all this new evidence to the court to clear their names.
I bet that didn't sit well with everyone involved.
Not really.
What was the reaction from the police and the DA's office? Were they quick to admit they'd made a mistake?
Not exactly.
Oh, wow.
There was a lot of resistance, especially from some of the detectives that were involved in the original investigation.
Really?
They were really adamant that
Uh,
the Central Park 5 were still somehow involved, even with the DNA evidence and Reyes's confession.
wow.
It's like they just couldn't let go of that original belief, even when it was proven wrong.
That's got to be incredibly frustrating for the 5 men and their families.
It was.
You know, they're finally exonerated, but there are still people out there doubting their innocence.
Yeah.
So how did they finally clear their names? Was there another trial?
The DA's office filed a motion to vacate the convictions.
Okay.
And a hearing was held in December of 2002. Yeah, the courtroom was packed with, a mix of supporters and then also people that still thought they were guilty.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly tense.
It was, yeah.
So what happened? Did the 5 men have to testify again? Like relive that whole ordeal?
No, they didn't have to testify.
Okay.
The focus was really just on all the new evidence.
Okay.
Reyes' confession, the DNA results.
Right.
The prosecution presented a strong case, arguing that the original confessions were unreliable and that Reyes' story just matched the facts.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
What about their defense attorneys? Were they still involved at this point?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
I mean, they'd been fighting for their client's innocence for over a decade,
It's amazing.
and they weren't going to stop now.
Wow.
This was their chance to finally see justice served.
Right.
And on December 19, 2002, Justice Charles Tejada, he vacated all the convictions against the Central Park 5.
That must have been an amazing moment. To finally be free, officially exonerated after all those years.
Yeah. I mean, it was a powerful victory, but it was also bittersweet, you know?
Yeah.
Because, these men, they lost years of their lives. They've suffered trauma. They suffered hardship. Their reputations were tarnished, so.
Right. It's a win, but it can't erase the injustice.
It really can't.
Yeah, that's hard to accept,
Yeah.
Shouldn't somebody be held accountable when innocent people are imprisoned? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a natural question to ask, but unfortunately, after the exoneration,
Yeah.
there was a lot of finger pointing.
Really?
Yeah, the police were blaming the prosecutors were blaming the police, but nobody was taking real responsibility.
Wait, hold on a second.
Yeah.
We're talking about 5 innocent teenagers that were robbed of their freedom, and no one was held responsible.
I mean, it's a harsh reality.
Yeah.
There were investigations, there were reports, but no one faced any real consequences.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the NYPD even conducted their own kind of internal review, but I think a lot of people saw that as the police investigating themselves.
Well, yeah, talk about a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So what did they find? Did they admit to any wrongdoing?
So this report, it was called the Armstrong Report,
Okay.
and it was kind of a mixed bag.
Okay.
They acknowledged that the confessions were unreliable, but they didn't actually go so far as to say that they were coerced.
Oh, wow.
And they also claimed that the police had probable cause for the arrests, even though the DNA evidence proved otherwise.
So basically, they just let themselves off the hook.
Essentially, yeah.
Wow.
They claimed that the police acted in good faith,
Okay.
even though it resulted in this massive miscarriage of justice.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What about the prosecutors?
Yeah.
Was there any scrutiny on their role in all this?
Yeah, Linda Fairstein, who was the head of the sex crimes unit at the time, she faced a lot of criticism for really pushing for those convictions.
Okay.
She, of course, claimed that she acted in good faith, but I think a lot of people felt like she was just blinded by ambition,
Yeah.
that she wanted a win in this really high-profile case, and so she just kind of ignored this glaring lack of evidence.
It's a sobering reminder that even those in positions of power can make mistakes.
Right.
And those mistakes can have devastating consequences.
It really can.
Yeah, it's also a reminder of how race and class can really impact the justice system.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, these were young Black and Latino men from low-income backgrounds.
Right.
It makes you wonder if the outcome would have been different if they were white and wealthy.
It's a disturbing thought, but I think it's one that we can't ignore.
No, we can't.
So their convictions are vacated.
Okay.
They're officially exonerated.
Yeah.
But what happens next? Well, they sue the city,
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
and it was a long and contentious battle.
I bet.
The city, under Mayor Bloomberg at the time, refused to admit any wrongdoing. They insisted that the trials were fair, which is, it's mind-blowing considering everything that had come to light.
It's like they were adding insult to injury.
Yeah, it really was.
So what happened? Did the city eventually cave?
It took years.
Wow.
But finally, under Mayor de Blasio, the city agreed to a $41 million settlement in 2014.
$41 million. That's a huge sum.
It is.
But can money really compensate for years of your life stolen, for the trauma that they endured, for the damage to their reputations?
Exactly. And even with that settlement, there was still no admission of wrongdoing from the city.
So even with some measure of justice, there's still this lingering sense of unfairness.
Yeah.
Like the system failed them and no one was truly held accountable.
Right.
So they're free, but what happens now? What does life look like for the Central Park Five after all they've been through?
Yeah, life after exoneration, it's complex.
Yeah.
You know, you're finally free, but you've lost years of your life.
Yeah.
Your reputation is tarnished. You've
Yeah.
experienced trauma that most people can't even fathom. So
Yeah. It's hard to even imagine what that must be like.
it's really tough.
So tell me more about their individual journeys.
Okay.
What have their lives been like since exoneration?
Well, some, like Antron McCrae, have chosen to kind of live these relatively private lives away from the spotlight.
Okay.
He moved to Georgia, he started a family, and really just focuses on healing.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. You
Yeah.
know, wanting to escape the public eye after such an ordeal.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So have they all sought, that kind of quiet life away from the spotlight?
No, some have taken a different path, like Kevin Richardson.
Okay.
He's become a really powerful advocate for criminal justice reform.
Oh, wow.
He works with organizations like the Innocence Project
Wow.
to prevent others from suffering the same fate.
Yeah, it's inspiring to see him, channel his pain into purpose,
Absolutely.
using his platform to make a difference.
He's an amazing guy.
Yeah. Have the others followed, similar path?
Yeah, Yusuf Salam has also dedicated himself to advocacy.
Okay.
He travels all over the world speaking about his experience,
Wow.
calling for reforms to protect young people during interrogations,
Right.
and to really address racial bias in policing.
Yeah.
He's become a real force for change.
It's amazing how they've turned, such a horrific experience into a platform for positive change.
It's really incredible.
What about Raymond Santana?
Raymond Santana is a fascinating case.
Okay.
He's also an advocate for justice reform,
Okay.
but he's also taken a more entrepreneurial route.
Okay.
He co-founded this clothing company called Park Madison NYC,
Wow, that's awesome.
which has become this real symbol of resilience and hope.
That's cool.
Yeah, and he's also a mentor to young people,
Yeah.
giving back to his community
That's amazing.
and just showing them that even after experiencing such injustice, you can still rise above it and create a positive impact.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Their stories are so powerful.
We are.
And what about Corey Wise? I mean, he was the oldest. He served his entire sentence in adult prison. His story must be particularly harrowing.
Oh, Corey Wise's journey is one of extraordinary resilience, you know?
Yeah.
Imagine enduring the brutal conditions of adult prison,
Yeah.
facing violence, facing despair, but he emerged with this spirit of forgiveness and this deep commitment to helping others.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What has he been doing since his release?
Well, he's become a really powerful advocate for justice reform, focusing on issues like solitary confinement
Okay.
and the treatment of juveniles in the adult system.
Right.
And he's also incredibly generous, donating a large portion of his settlement money to the Innocence Project,
Wow.
which helped secure his freedom.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds like the Central Park Five, despite everything they've endured,
Right.
have found ways to move forward, to heal,
Yeah.
and to make a positive impact.
Absolutely.
It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome even the most unimaginable adversity.
I think their stories are both heartbreaking and inspiring.
Yeah.
They really show the human cost of injustice, but they also offer hope that healing and redemption are possible.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Their stories are so important, but we can't forget about the other victim in this case.
Right.
What about Trisha Miley?
Yeah.
What's her perspective on all of this?
You're right. Her voice deserves to be heard.
Yeah.
Trisha Miley's story is one of incredible resilience.
Yeah.
She suffered life-altering injuries, a long and painful recovery, both physically and emotionally. She had to piece together what happened based on others' accounts, medical records, and the scars that she carried.
That's an incredibly difficult journey.
It is.
How did she react when she found out the men convicted of attacking her were actually innocent?
She's described feeling, shocked and dismayed.
Yeah.
Imagine believing for years that those responsible for such a horrific act were behind bars, only to find out that it wasn't true.
Right.
Yeah. It must have been incredibly unsettling.
It makes you question everything, doesn't it?
It really does.
The nature of truth, memory, justice.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
It truly is. This case has so many layers.
Yeah.
The wrongful convictions, the trauma that was endured by the 5 men and their families,
Right.
and then Trisha Miley's own journey of survival and healing.
Right.
It's complex, and there's no easy answers.
Before we wrap up, I want to go back to Matias Reyes for a minute.
Okay.
His confession, it blew the case wide open.
Right.
But did he ever face any charges for the attack on Trisha Miley?
That's a great question, and it highlights another frustrating aspect of this whole story.
Oh, no.
Because of the statute of limitations.
Oh, right.
Reyes couldn't be prosecuted for the Central Park jogger rape, even though he confessed and his DNA matched.
Wait, what? He admitted to this horrific crime, and because too much time had passed, he couldn't be held accountable.
That's right.
Wow.
It's this legal technicality that just added insult to injury. Yeah. For both the Central Park Five and Trisha Miley.
It's crazy.
The real perpetrator essentially walked free,
Yeah.
while innocent men were unjustly imprisoned.
It's incredibly difficult to accept.
It is.
It feels like a final blow, like a reminder that justice isn't always served, even when the truth is revealed.
It's a harsh reality.
Yeah.
The Central Park jogger case is a really stark reminder that our justice system, while it, strives for fairness, is ultimately run by humans who are susceptible to bias, to pressure, to mistakes.
It's also a reminder that justice isn't always swift.
Right.
Or easy, especially for those who are marginalized or disenfranchised.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Central Park Five, they were young Black and Latino men from low-income backgrounds.
Right.
They didn't have the same resources or social capital as Trisha Miley, who was this young white professional woman.
Right.
It's hard to imagine this case unfolding the same way if the roles were reversed.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. And a reminder that we still have a long way to go in achieving true equality and justice in our society.
Absolutely.
So we've explored, the details of the case,
Right.
the exoneration, the aftermath, but there's still one crucial element that's kind of missing.
What's that?
The voices of the Central Park Five themselves.
You're absolutely right. We've talked about them.
Yeah.
We've analyzed their story.
Right.
But it's essential to hear their perspectives, their experiences in their own words.
Yeah.
That's what truly brings this case to life
Absolutely.
and allows us to really understand the human cost of this miscarriage of justice.
I couldn't agree more. So in our next and final segment, we'll delve into their stories, their journeys through the criminal justice system,
Okay.
and their lives after exoneration.
Sounds good.
We'll also hear from Trisha Miley
Okay.
and gain her perspective on this really complex and impactful case.
It's a story of resilience,
Yeah.
the enduring power of truth,
Mm-hmm.
and the ongoing fight for justice and healing. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the Central Park Jogger case.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
So much to unpack.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have
You know, the crime, the investigation,
Right.
wrongful convictions,
the exoneration.
the aftermath.
Mhm.
But now it's time to hear directly from those most affected by this profound miscarriage of justice,
Right.
the Central Park Five themselves.
You're absolutely right. And it's so crucial to remember that these are real people
Yeah.
with their own unique stories and perspectives.
Right.
Hearing their voices firsthand is what's really going to allow us to grasp the human cost of this case.
Absolutely. So far, we've mostly talked about them.
Yeah,
But let's shift the focus, allow them to speak for themselves.
I think that's important.
You know, what have they said about what they were actually doing in the park that night?
Well, I mean, as with many teenagers, they were hanging out with friends, exploring the park,
Right.
and unfortunately getting caught up in some trouble. Remember, it was a very chaotic night in the park.
Right.
There were multiple reports of assaults and robberies involving this large group of teenagers.
Right. And the police quickly kind of connected them to those earlier incidents,
Right.
you know, assuming they must also be involved in the attack on Trisha Miley.
Right, guilt by association.
Yeah, exactly. But their accounts of that night differ significantly from the narrative that was ultimately presented by the police and the media,
Oh, absolutely.
you know.
Yeah, their stories really highlight the dangers of jumping to conclusions
Yeah.
and relying on stereotypes.
Right.
It's a cautionary tale for all of us.
So let's hear their side of the story. What have the Central Park Five said about their experiences that night in their own words?
Each of them has spoken out over the years,
Yeah.
in interviews, documentaries.
Right.
Some of them have even written their own books.
Yeah.
They describe being swept up in this chaotic situation,
Mm.
targeted by the police because of their race and their age, and then subjected to this intense pressure and manipulation during interrogations.
Their stories are truly heartbreaking, you know? It's like
Yeah.
they were just kids caught in this perfect storm of fear, prejudice, and a desperate search for answers.
Exactly. I mean, they were young, they were scared, they were overwhelmed,
Yeah.
they didn't understand their rights,
Right.
and they were certainly no match for these seasoned detectives who were determined to get confessions, even if it meant using questionable tactics.
Right. Speaking of those interrogation tactics, let's dig a little deeper into that.
Okay.
What exactly did the police do to elicit these false confessions from these teenagers?
Well, the teenagers have described being separated from their parents,
Wow.
denied access to lawyers, and subjected to hours of relentless questioning, often late into the night.
It sounds like a psychological pressure cooker,
It was.
especially for teenagers who are already scared and confused.
It was a highly coercive environment, and the teenagers have said that detectives threatened them, yelled at them, even physically intimidated them.
Oh, wow.
They were told that if they didn't confess, they would face harsher charges and spend the rest of their lives in prison.
And tragically, it worked.
Yeah.
You know, under that kind of duress, these scared and vulnerable teenagers confess to a crime they didn't commit.
They do.
Have they spoken about that moment of confession? You know, what they were thinking, what was going through their minds?
They've said they felt trapped, hopeless, and desperate to just escape the pressure of that interrogation room.
Right.
They thought if they just told the police what they wanted to hear, they could go home.
Right.
They didn't fully grasp the long-term consequences of confessing to a crime they didn't commit.
It's a stark reminder of how vulnerable young people are in these situations
It is.
and how easily their rights can be violated.
It's a chilling thought, and it underscores the need for safeguards, like requiring the presence of a parent or a lawyer during interrogations,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with minors.
Right. So these teenagers, under duress, they confessed to a crime they didn't commit.
Right.
Did they recant their confessions right away?
Some of them did. As soon as they had a chance to speak to their lawyers, to their families, they insisted that their concessions were false, that they were coerced,
Mm-hmm.
but by then the narrative had already been set,
Yeah.
and their voices were drowned out by the media frenzy and the public outcry.
Right. It's like the case had taken on a life of its own,
It did.
fueled by fear and this thirst for someone to be held responsible.
It's like a runaway train.
What about their families? How did they react to these confessions? Did they believe their sons?
You know, their families never wavered in their belief.
Wow.
They knew their children, and they knew that they were incapable of the brutality that was described in those confessions.
Right.
They stood by them through the trials, through the appeals, through the years of imprisonment.
That's amazing.
It's a powerful testament to the unwavering love and support of family.
It's also a stark reminder of the devastating toll that wrongful convictions take, not just on the individuals, but on their families as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The families endured years of unimaginable pain, stress, and financial hardship. They fought tirelessly for their son's freedom,
Wow.
often with limited resources, against a system that seemed determined to keep them behind bars.
So let's talk about the moment that those convictions were finally vacated.
Okay.
What were those first moments of freedom like for the Central Park Five? And
Yeah?
how have they navigated life after exoneration?
You know, those first moments were a mix of joy, relief, and I think disbelief.
Yeah.
You know, imagine being imprisoned for a crime you didn't commit,
Right.
spending years of your life behind bars,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you're free.
Yeah.
It's an experience that's really hard to put into words.
It must have felt like waking up from a nightmare, but a nightmare that left very real scars.
Precisely. They emerged from prison, changed men. You know, having endured unimaginable trauma, both from the wrongful conviction and the harsh realities of prison life.
Yeah.
They had to rebuild their lives, their relationships, and really find a way to cope with the psychological and emotional weight of what they had endured.
Let's talk about their individual journeys after exoneration, starting with Antron McCrae.
Okay.
What path did his life take after his release?
Antron McCrae has chosen to live a relatively private life since his exoneration.
Okay.
He moved to Georgia, he started a family, and he's largely stayed out of the public eye, you know, focusing on healing and rebuilding his life away from the spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable that he would choose to retreat from the public eye after everything he's been through.
I get it.
What about Kevin Richardson? What direction did his life take?
Kevin Richardson has become a really powerful advocate for criminal justice reform.
Okay.
He works with organizations like the Innocence Project
Wow.
to share his story and push for changes to help prevent others from suffering the same fate.
That's amazing.
And he's also been a real source of support for other exonerees, helping them navigate the challenges of returning to life outside of prison.
It's inspiring to see him, channeling his experience into something so positive,
It is.
using his platform to help others.
He's a good guy.
What about Yusuf Salam? Has he also been involved in activism?
Yusuf Salam has also dedicated himself to advocacy and activism.
Okay.
He travels the world, speaks about his experiences,
Wow.
and pushes for reforms in the criminal justice system.
That's great.
He's particularly focused on protecting the rights of young people during interrogations and addressing racial bias in policing.
He's a powerful voice for change.
He is.
It's amazing how he's turned such a negative experience into a platform for positive change.
It's really inspiring.
What about Raymond Santana? What path has his life taken?
Raymond Santana's story is a little different. He's also been an advocate for justice reform,
Okay.
but he's also taken a more entrepreneurial route.
Oh.
He co-founded this clothing company called Park Madison NYC,
Okay.
which has become this real symbol of resilience and hope.
That's awesome.
And he's also a mentor to young people in his community, showing them that even after facing such immense injustice, you can rise above it and create something positive.
It's inspiring to see how he's taken such a negative experience
It is.
and turned it into something creative and empowering.
Absolutely.
What about Corey Wise? His story is especially compelling considering he was the oldest of the five
Right.
and served his entire sentence in an adult prison.
Right. Corey Wise's journey is one of extraordinary resilience.
It is.
I mean, he endured horrific conditions in adult prison, unimaginable violence and despair.
Wow.
Yet he emerged with this spirit of forgiveness and this deep commitment to helping others.
It's remarkable.
It is.
His strength and resilience are truly inspiring. What has he been doing since his release?
Corey Wise has become a really powerful advocate for justice reform, focusing on issues like solitary confinement and the treatment of juveniles in the adult justice system.
Yeah.
And he's also incredibly generous, donating a significant portion of his settlement money to the Innocence Project,
That's amazing.
which was instrumental in securing his exoneration.
It's incredible how each of the Central Park Five has, in their own way, found a path forward after enduring such a profound injustice.
They have.
It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity and find healing and purpose.
Absolutely. Their stories offer a glimmer of hope,
Yeah.
showing that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, resilience and redemption are possible.
While we've just heard from the Central Park Five, we can't forget about the other victim in this case.
Right.
What is Trisha Maylee's perspective on everything that transpired?
You're right. Her voice is equally important in understanding the full scope of this story.
Absolutely.
Trisha Maylee's story is one of remarkable resilience and recovery. She suffered life-altering injuries and endured this long and arduous process of physical and emotional healing. And it's important to remember that she had to piece together what happened to her based on the accounts of others, medical records, and the physical scars that she carried.
That's an incredibly difficult journey to even imagine.
It is, yeah.
How did she react when she learned that the men convicted of attacking her were innocent?
She has described feeling, shocked and dismayed.
Yeah.
Imagine believing for years that those responsible for such a horrific act were behind bars.
Right.
Only to discover it wasn't true.
Yeah.
It forces you to question everything you thought you knew.
It's a stark reminder that even when the truth is revealed, it doesn't erase the pain and trauma of the past.
Exactly. This case has so many layers and complexities.
It does.
The wrongful convictions, the suffering of the Central Park Five and their families.
Yeah.
And then there's Trisha Maylee's own journey of survival and healing. It's a case that will stay with you long after you've heard all the details.
As we conclude this deep dive into the Central Park Jogger case, what are some key takeaways? What can we learn from the story about race, justice, and the power of narratives?
The Central Park Jogger case serves as this really potent reminder of the dangers of racial bias in our criminal justice system.
Yeah.
These 5 teenagers were targeted because they fit a certain profile.
Right.
And their race undeniably played a significant role in how they were perceived, treated, and judged.
And that bias was further fueled by the media coverage.
Oh, absolutely.
Which often sensationalized the case and portrayed these teenagers as dangerous criminals before they even had a chance to defend themselves in court.
Right, and it highlights the immense power of media narratives and how they can shape public opinion and even influence the course of justice.
It's a crucial reminder for all of us to be critical consumers of media and to question the narratives that we're presented with.
Yeah, don't just believe everything you read.
This case also exposed this systemic issue of false confessions.
Right.
Highlighting the vulnerability of young people during interrogations and the desperate need for safeguards to protect their rights.
Yes, absolutely. The Central Park Five were coerced into confessing to a crime they didn't commit.
Yeah.
And their story sparked really crucial reforms in police interrogation techniques, such as the increased use of video recording.
Right.
But there's still work to be done to prevent false confessions and ensure everyone, regardless of their age or their background, is treated fairly under the law.
This case also underscores the vital importance of evidence-based justice. The convictions were based on coerced confessions and this flimsy circumstantial evidence.
Right.
There was no DNA evidence.
Yep.
Yet they were found guilty and spent years of their lives behind bars.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that even our justice system, which strives for fairness, is not perfect. Innocent people can be wrongfully convicted. Especially when bias, fear, and political pressure contaminate the process.
But ultimately, the Central Park Jogger case is also a story about resilience.
It is.
The power of truth and the enduring strength of the human spirit.
I agree.
Despite the horrific injustice they endured, the Central Park Five have rebuilt their lives, become advocates for change, and inspired countless others with their stories of courage and perseverance.
Their journey is a really powerful testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome even the most unimaginable adversity.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope, healing, and redemption are possible.
I love that.
This deep dive into the Central Park Jogger case has been a difficult but essential journey.
It has.
And it's a story that continues to challenge our assumptions and inspire us to fight for a more just and equitable world.
Could not agree more.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's been informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
I hope so, too.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning.
Yes.
And keep striving for a world where justice prevails.
And remember, sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones that force us to confront uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
And challenge the narratives that we thought we knew.
Well said. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.